Let me share a disturbing fact with you that might not be that surprising. The United States has by far the largest number of documented serial killers in the world. According to Radford University's Serial Killer Information Center, it has more documented serial killers than the next 10 highest countries on the list combined. So I suppose that would be a reason that a serial killer who was once sentenced to death, only to be released on parole somehow, is a person that I have never heard of until stumbling upon this story while researching video topics. When you live in a country with the highest number of serial killers in the world, I guess some names and stories get lost in the shuffle. Welcome to my channel, Weird Wild Stories. My name is Chrissy, and I typically discuss things that are dark, mysterious, and creepy. If that interests you, please subscribe or follow me. If you enjoy this video, leave me a comment, hit the like button, or share this video with a friend. That really helps out a small, growing channel like mine. Okay, with that being said, let's get into today's story. Kenneth McDuff, one of the most brutal serial killers in Texas history, began his horrific spree long before he became a notorious name. Raised in Rosebud, Texas, McDuff's upbringing, filled with indulgence from his family and especially his mother, seemed to instill in him a sense of invincibility. But this feeling would eventually come to an end, although much later than it should have. To find out how that happened, let's start at the beginning. On a quiet street in Rosebud, Texas, there stood a modest house on 201 Linden Street. Inside lived Kenneth Allen McDuff. Born in 1946, McDuff was the fifth of 6 children, growing up in a family that gave him far too much freedom. His mother, Addie McDuff, known as Pistol-Packing Mama, was fiercely protective. Her infamous reputation began when she once threatened a school bus driver at gunpoint for kicking McDuff's brother off the bus. From an early age, Kenneth learned that consequences didn't always apply to him, especially with his mother always ready to defend his every action. At Rosebud High School, McDuff had a different reputation, that of a bully. Yet he was smart enough to avoid those who could fight back. After picking a losing fight with a popular athlete, McDuff dropped out of school, choosing instead to work for his father's concrete business. But even this honest labor couldn't tame the violent impulses simmering within him. McDuff's criminal record started with burglaries and smaller offenses, but it didn't take long for his true nature to reveal itself. He'd openly brag about violent acts, including rape and murder, long before he was convicted. At just 18, McDuff already had 12 burglary convictions, but it was the summer of 1966 that would seal his reputation as a monster. On the night of August 6, 1966, McDuff and his accomplice, Roy Dale Green, set out on what McDuff described as looking for a girl. What followed was an act of sheer evil. Spotting 3 teenagers, Robert Brand, his girlfriend Edna Louise Sullivan, and Brand's cousin Mark Dunham, they forced them into a car trunk at gunpoint. After executing Brand and Dunham in cold blood, McDuff proceeded to rape Sullivan before killing her in one of the most gruesome ways imaginable. He used a broomstick to strangle her, leaving her body discarded in the bushes. It was an event so horrifying it became known as the Broomstick Murders. Despite the brutality of his crimes, McDuff's death sentence for the 1966 murders was commuted to life in prison when the U.S. Supreme Court temporarily abolished the death penalty in 1972. It was a decision that would lead to more devastation. Through a mix of legal maneuvers and a tragically lenient parole system in Texas at the time, McDuff found himself back on the streets by 1989. Within days of his release, McDuff is believed to have resumed his killing spree. One of the first victims of this second wave of terror was 29-year-old Seraphia Parker, whose body was found in October of that year. But McDuff wasn't charged for that murder. He managed to avoid immediate suspicion despite a clear pattern of violent behavior. In October 1991, McDuff abducted 37-year-old Brenda Thompson, a sex worker in Waco, and drove her toward certain death. What's terrifying is how close he came to getting caught that very night. Stopping near a police checkpoint, Thompson, bound in the passenger seat, desperately kicked the windshield, trying to signal the officers. McDuff sped away, eluding the police before torturing and killing her. Her body wouldn't be found until 7 years later, in 1998. Just days after Brenda's murder, McDuff killed again, this time 21-year-old Regina Deanne Moore, another sex worker. As McDuff's list of victims grew, so did the brutality of his crimes. In December 1991, McDuff and an accomplice, Alva Hank Worley, abducted 28-year-old Colleen Reed from a car wash in Austin. Reed endured unimaginable horrors before McDuff ended her life. Worley would later confess to raping Reed but denied participating in her murder. McDuff's reign of terror stretched over multiple counties, making it difficult for authorities to connect the dots. But eventually, his carelessness would catch up to him. In 1992, McDuff kidnapped and killed Melissa Northrup, a pregnant convenience store clerk. The hunt for McDuff intensified after her disappearance, and tips from witnesses who saw McDuff at the store helped police close in on him. McDuff fled to Kansas City, Missouri, assuming a new identity and attempting to blend into a new life. But it wasn't long before he was recognized by a coworker who had seen his face on the television show America's Most Wanted. On May 4, 1992, Kenneth McDuff was finally arrested, bringing his murderous spree to an end. In 1993, McDuff was convicted of Melissa Northrup's murder and sentenced to death. But justice didn't come swiftly for the families of his victims. Before we close McDuff's chapter, it's important to remember those who suffered at his hands. Let's briefly honor the lives of his known victims. Edna Sullivan, a high school student, had dreams of becoming a teacher. She loved reading and spending time with her friends. She volunteered on Sundays to work at the daycare center in her church. Her life was cut tragically short when McDuff abducted and murdered her. Robert Brand, a football player with a bright future ahead, was known for his kindness and loyalty to his friends. He loved playing the guitar. He was killed alongside Edna Sullivan while trying to protect her. Mark Dunham, a fellow student and aspiring engineer, was passionate about technology and hoped to make a difference in the world, and he loved to play the drums. He, too, was senselessly murdered that night. Brenda Thompson, a shy young woman who loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, was one of McDuff's later victims. Her gentle nature made the brutality of her death all the more heart-wrenching. Colleen Reed, a young accountant with a promising career, was abducted from a car wash. She was described by those who knew her as hardworking and kind-hearted. McDuff's cruelty took her from her family far too soon. Regina Moore, 1991. Regina, a sex worker from Waco, was abducted by McDuff and later murdered. Not much is known about her personal life, but her murder was part of McDuff's spree targeting vulnerable women. Valencia Joshua, 1992. Valencia was a 22-year-old student at Texas State Technical College. McDuff abducted her from the parking lot of the campus. Her body was discovered in a gravel pit 2 months later. Friends described Valencia as a bright student with dreams of a better future. Melissa Ann Northrup, 1992. Melissa, a 22-year-old mother of two, was abducted while working at a convenience store in Waco. She was pregnant at the time of her murder. Melissa's family remembered her as a loving and caring individual who had a deep love for her children. McDuff is also believed to have murdered Cynthia Renee Gonzalez, 23, who was found dead in a creek bed near County Road 313 in heavily wooded terrain 1 mile west of I-35 on September 21, 1991, some 6 days after she was reported missing in Arlington. The body of 31-year-old Seraphia Parker, a known sex worker, was found naked in a field, beaten and strangled on October 14, 1989, in Temple, along the I-35 corridor, a town not far from the prison. Law enforcement strongly believed McDuff to be responsible for her murder, but he wasn't charged with the crime. It is incredibly sad, knowing that if Kenneth had not been paroled, these victims would not have had their lives taken in such horrific, senseless ways. It is shocking to know that the criminal justice system would allow a convicted murderer, rapist, to go free, especially considering his original sentence for his earlier crimes was the death penalty. Instead of being remorseful and grateful for the second chance at life handed to him upon his parole, Kenneth chose to pick up where he left off. It is believed he started killing almost immediately as the body of Seraphia Parker was found just 3 days after his release. These are only a few of the known victims of Kenneth McDuff. It is believed that he murdered at least 14 innocent people, but the actual number of his victims is something we will probably never know. Appeals delayed his execution for years. When McDuff was finally scheduled for execution, he ordered a strange last meal: a hamburger, French fries, and a Dr. Pepper. His last words were a defiant, "I'm ready to be released. Release me." On November 17, 1998, Kenneth McDuff was executed by lethal injection, marking the end of one of Texas's most infamous killers. Duff's legacy is one of unthinkable cruelty. His release in 1989, despite the brutality of his earlier crimes, remains one of the most glaring failures of the justice system. But perhaps the most disturbing part of McDuff's story is how many lives might have been saved had he never been given that second chance. His case became a key factor in reshaping Texas's parole system, ensuring that future criminals like him would never walk free again. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out more of the videos I have to offer on my channel, Weird Wild Stories. You'll find short horror stories, true crime cases like this one, and more. Until next time, stay safe, but always stay curious.